Good morning, everyone. Welcome once again to the season 2 of transforming the education ecosystem and the new normal. So for today, we prepared two important topics for you regarding differentiated instruction for PWDs and also another online learning platform that you can use to transform your curricula, to transform your syllabi to an online learning platform. Okay, so before we begin our session for this particular morning, we would like to express our gratitude to the 19,000 followers in our Facebook account, that is CHED Region 1. And last Tuesday, we were able to have a 99,219 viewers in our previous session. That is last Tuesday. And in our YouTube channel, we do have 4,500 subscribers. Please continue to subscribe in our YouTube channel. That is CHED Regional Office 1. Okay, so to all our live participants, there is no registration that will be given to you. Just stay with us in our Facebook account and also in our YouTube channel. Okay, we will also be giving e-certificates after this particular session, after our afternoon speaker. And of course, I hope you were able to participate in the mode assessment that was given to you by our speaker. We gave you the link. Kindly go back to the comment in our Facebook and in our YouTube for you to be able to accomplish the mode assessment. Okay, that will be needed by our speaker in her presentation this morning. Okay, so I guess our speaker is already ready. So before she begins, I would like to introduce her. Our speaker is Miss Cristina Nieves Aligada Halal, or Teacher Tina, has been a SPED practitioner for the last 16 years. She earned her master's degree in educational foundations, majoring in educational psychology from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and is a dissertation away from completing her PhD program in special education, also at the University of the Philippines. But it was her work as principal of Laro, Lapis at Libro, a transition school for learners with special needs, where she got to hone her skills as a SPED teacher and administrator. At present, Teacher Tina is a faculty member at Miriam College, Loyola Heights, and is a part-time lecturer at the UP Diliman's College of Education. In Miriam, she chairs the Special Needs and Inclusive Education program at the graduate level. She also does training and consultation work in special and inclusive education and currently serves as the board secretary of the ADHD Society of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Miss Cristina Nieves Aligada Halal.
Hi, good
Hello,
morning,
ma'am.
everybody. Good
Good
morning,
morning.
Sir Bill. Good morning, Sir.
Yes. Okay. So, how are you, ma'am?
I'm good. It's a gloomy, rainy morning here in Marikina. But I've been looking at the mood board that we sent, and it seems there are a lot of people in a sunny disposition. So, good morning to everybody.
All right. Okay. So
Sir,
that's nice to
am I
hear,
sorry?
ma'am.
Am I
So,
coming?
we will be giving you the.
Yes, am I coming
Yes.
in?
Po?
Okay.
No, no, no. It's okay, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we will be giving you now the floor you to start your discussion regarding individualized and differentiated instruction for PWDs.
Okay. Okay. Let me just check. So am I sharing the screen? Okay. So good morning, everybody. Again, I'd like to thank CHED Region 1, especially Dr. Mel Ancheta, for inviting me to share with everyone my experiences as a teacher in special needs education and also in inclusive education. So the title of my presentation for this morning is Individualized and Differentiated Instruction for PWDs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, okay, so just to give you an idea of today's presentation, so this is the scope. My objective is really to be able to share with you my knowledge and experiences in teaching in an inclusive environment. Um, it's not going to be so this session is not going to be specifically for sped teachers in a sped school or in a self-contained setting, because we presume that sped teachers already have been trained in special education. They may not have been trained specifically for flexible learning, but you know the skills as a sped teacher will start to kick in. But our the request of CHED Region 1 was for me to be able to present to you tips on how teachers who may not have enough SPED training or inclusive ed training, how they can be inclusive in this time of the pandemic. We understand that there are a lot of students with additional needs who may be in inclusive classrooms, who may be in traditional schools, and we take into consideration that that their teachers may not be specifically trained for inclusive ed. So this particular webinar was designed for you. Okay, so very simply, it's the objective is to help you become effective educators as you apply inclusive ed principles into your own teaching practices. What we want at the end of the day is for you to be able to respond to the needs of your students with additional needs. Of course, under a flexible learning environment. So earlier today, you were asked to do, to answer, to go to this particular site to be able to express how you're feeling this morning. So I'd like to, okay, hold on, sorry. I may have some tech issues. Okay, wait. I don't know if you see. Okay. Sorry. Okay. There. So I think you're seeing right now the mood board that we have. So it's actually, okay, hold on, I cannot find my cursor. Okay, so there have been, there you go. Okay, there have been answers already. As I said, here in my part of the Philippines, it's drizzling here in Marikina, but most of you have been sending smiles. Oh, we have someone from Agusan del Sur. So obviously you're all having great mornings. Some are excited, feeling wonderful. So this is actually what we call a check-in. Okay, so I hope you can see the images. Okay, you're ready. I am too. So I hope you see the images. Oh, I can see a student of mine check in. Good morning again. And so this is a check-in that you can do in your own classes. If you're doing online classes, you can go to Padlet, padlet.com, and actually find out how your students are doing. Later, I'll explain the wisdom behind what check-ins can do for your class. Okay, let me go back. Okay, this is a thing about webinars. I have no idea. Wait, hold on. Okay, it doesn't want to. All right, again. Take two. Okay, I think what you're seeing now is my screen. Hold on. So sorry. Okay. Dr. Mel, I hope you're listening. Is it okay for you to share my PowerPoint because it doesn't want to open now? Oh, okay. Here it goes. For a while. Sorry, almost there. And okay. I hope it's sharing. Okay. It hold on. There you go. Okay. Anyway, so flexible learning. This is the context that we are currently placed in. As we know, we're all in a pandemic. It's a COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people say we're not prepared for this.
Excuse me po. I'm sorry if
Yes,
I need to interrupt you.
yes,
I
Doc
get
Mel.
the slides. Uh,
Is it sharing, Doc Mel? Sorry, I cannot see my. I hope it's
Kindly,
sharing.
you pick po yung ano ma'am, yung full screen po ng presentation po nila doon sa
Is
application. So,
okay? Wait a minute.
is a presenter's view po ma'am.
Teka ha. Kasi hindi siya nag again. Is it sharing now?
Wala pa po ma'am.
Doc Mel, is it okay if you just share the slides that I sent you? I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's not working. It was earlier. Uh, oh, wait. Okay, let's see. One more time. Okay, is this better?
It's presenter's view ma'am. Kindly
One more.
select po yung full screen.
This one. Is this okay, sir, Doc Mel?
I guess I'll just need to present your slide.
Okay, all right. Sorry for the tech issue. So we need to be on the slide for flexible learning.
Is it moving?
There you go. Thank you, Doc Mel. Okay, so Okay, the slide after that, please. Okay, so thank you. So as I was saying, flexible learning is what uh, HEIs are being called to do at this point in time. The idea of flexible learning is something I think that we will need to clarify, because a lot of people think flexible learning means simply it's a delivery mode. What we have to understand is flexible learning is more than instructional delivery. It actually is a curriculum design wherein schools, institutions are asked to review the current needs of their student population, and then from there how we should be delivering our courses, how we should be teaching, even the content that we will need to present to our students. Those are all things that have to be responsive to the needs of the student population. So if I may quote Chairman De Vera, he said in May of 2020, one of the characteristics of flexible learning is that you design your delivery based on the situation of the students, the faculty, and the schools. You have to find out what percentage of students have no connectivity at all, who have some connectivity and have full connectivity, and then design your classes based on that. Next slide, please. All right, so the idea is that under flexible learning, you want to be able to modify your curriculum and instruction, and at the same time use different learning delivery modes in order to come up or to have an output that is a learner-centered curriculum that's relevant, accessible, and responsible to the needs of all. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's see now. Prior to the pandemic, what was the situation in schools? Obviously, classes were face-to-face, but I have to say, based on observation, a lot of teachers, or most of our teachers, design their classes or their courses as if you had just one type of student in mind. Unless you're doing, for example, problem-based learning, project-based learning, or you really are an inclusive teacher, most practitioners still would tend to design their classes one way. And so the idea, what happens for the student with additional needs is that this student would have to adjust. So if someone struggles with the course design of the teacher, or with the lessons of the teacher, then that person will have to work doubly hard to ensure that he or she would be able to participate and achieve in a particular course. But next slide. What we want, when we talk about students with additional needs, before the pandemic, usually when you say, some call them PWDs, some call them students with learners with different needs, differently abled. Now we call them SWANs, students with additional needs. Okay, and when you talk about SWANs prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, usually we refer to students who may be diagnosed with a disability or may be prone to marginalization. So we have to reiterate that it's not just those with disabilities that are considered SWANs, but also those who may be, for example, victims of war, who may be part of an indigenous peoples, who are persons at risk of a disability in conflict with the law, etc. Next slide, please. Now, our current context is that, of course, we have the pandemic. We're being asked to do physical, I prefer the term physical distancing more than social distancing, although I know that social distancing is a term that we use in the medical field. But yeah, the idea is that we limit contact with other people because we want to maintain, we want to protect ourselves from the virus. But the thing is, apart from that, we also realize now that a lot of our students have limited access to the internet, not just the internet, but also limited access to gadgets. So it's rare to find, or maybe not rare, but it will be seldom that you find families who would have one gadget per family member, because a lot of us are working from home, and then schools are doing online lessons, online courses, the need to use gadgets is also very important. And we find out now that that affects the learning of our students. There are also limitations at home. A lot of us have chores, a lot of us have other responsibilities. And then there are student circumstances, there are high stress levels, not just among the students, but also among the faculty members. And then there's also the limitations of the teachers. One of the difficulties we are discovering now is that a lot of us are not prepared to go online. This is a current context. And so given that this is a current context, what do you think would happen to those with additional needs? The way I see it, it's just it's two things. Either that student with additional needs becomes all the more ignored, or we have another set of students with additional needs that we will have to be able to address. Next slide, please. Okay, so during the COVID pandemic, now we don't just have students who will be diagnosed with a disability, or anyone belonging from in a vulnerable group prone to marginalization, but students with additional needs can also mean the typical student without access to any learning materials, whether that's online or offline. Next slide. All right, so the way I see it, the best way to teach during this pandemic is to be inclusive. How do we do that? What do we say when we mean inclusive education? Next slide. Okay, so you have here three pictures, and I'd like you to examine each one. So there are three people trying to watch a baseball game. Obviously, the first one, it doesn't work, the first photo, because one student is left behind, one student given the same amount of support. We find that it does not provide access to all students. The second frame shows how, given the kind of support, that the amount of support needed by each student, it is possible for them to view the baseball game. But the third one, we removed the wall, we removed the barrier. Now, among these three photos, what would be inclusive would actually be the third photo. Next slide. There. So the idea of inclusive education is really the removal of barriers, whether these are attitudinal barriers, these are physical, these are institutional barriers. What we want is the removal of those, which means we also have to take into consideration the current context of our students to find out what exactly are the barriers that they may be experiencing. And then, so we remove that, we take that out of the situation so that we can ensure the presence, the participation, and the achievement of all types of learners. This actually is the definition of UNESCO for inclusive education. To find out if you really are inclusive, check for those three things: presence, participation, and achievement of all. If your students are in your class and are able to participate, but they're struggling in class, then you probably not just struggling, but there are no opportunities for achievement because you do not accommodate, because you do not design with that person in mind as well. Then I'm sorry to say, but you're not totally inclusive. So again, inclusive education means the presence, participation, and achievement of all learners. Next slide. Okay, so this is what we need to aim for every time we plan our lessons. Whether we have in our classes students who have actual diagnosis, or we suspect maybe one or two students would probably have a diagnosis and would be at risk, we need to check for the presence, participation, again, and the achievement of all. Next slide. Okay. When you design your courses, imagine it this way. So you're being asked to, for example, to design a mall. You don't just design a mall for one particular type of clientele. You want to ensure that whoever goes to your mall enjoys going there. That whoever would be visiting the mall would find things accessible. Safety is a consideration. You want to be able to make it enjoyable. It's an enjoyable experience. There's a lot of access and there are options available. For example, if you look at the persons here going down the stairs, I'm sure there's an escalator there, there's an elevator there, but they're here anyway. They would like to go down, so they take this option. You take into consideration safety. You take into consideration the height of the railings here. There's decorations. Can be a multi-purpose area. So, in other words, when you design something, you don't design for just one particular type of student. It's the same way when you design courses in inclusive education. You have to anticipate the how diverse your class will be. And so one of the best ways to design would be to really project, no, find out who your students are, and then design around the needs of everyone. If you feel this is overwhelming, then yes, next slide. Next slide, please. There. If you feel designing for a mall is overwhelming, then you can scale it down a bit and perhaps design for one floor. This actually is the image of, I think this is Changi Airport in Singapore. It's just one floor, but if you notice, there are still options available for everyone. If you're tired to walk, you can go on the walkalator, and it's I'd like to call it bare minimum design for different types of learners or different types of clientele. If the idea to you of designing for all your learners in class is overwhelming, try to go for the bare minimum. Later on, I'll give you tips on how you can do this. But if you notice here, so there's a walkalator, there are seats around, there are signs. So, just by looking at this, it's basic, but there are options involved. So this is what we aim for. So now, student presence. Next slide. Next slide again. Okay. So I kept on repeating now. Presence, participation, and achievement of all. So the first question that you have to ask yourself in designing your classes for those with additional needs is that you have to ask yourself, how can I ensure the presence of all of my students at every session? I have to reiterate every session because the tendency is for us to just design for the first session and then forget that each session may be different from the next. For example, one day you may have internet connection, the following day you lost it. That happened to me last month. I was teaching an online course in Miriam College. First day, it was okay. And the following day, I lost my connection for 3 weeks. And so if it happens to me as the educator, chances are it's going to happen to our students. So we have to stay on top of these things. So one of the things that I suggest, again, we're going for a flexible learning environment because this is what is being asked of us. What we want is to provide options, not just for online learning, but offline learning. So I placed a box here because the idea is you do everything. This is not a checklist where you can just choose, okay, I'll do accessible resources. I won't check attendance, etc. No, this is something that you will have to do as a package. That is flexible learning. It is one teacher planning for several possibilities. So for this one, it's very simple. We plan for online learning, but we also assume that a lot of our students might not have access to internet, or maybe they do, but they have limited access to gadgets. And so we also provide offline options. So how can you ensure the presence of all your students in an online course? Of course, first of all, you make your resources accessible, and then do not check attendance. Yesterday, I tuned into the public consultation for of CHED for the implementation of flexible learning, and there were questions regarding attendance. And one of the tech panel members, the tech committee, said we have to change our mindset when it comes to flexible learning. So checking attendance will not be part of that. Okay, because yun nga, we don't know what the situation of our students is. And so instead of checking attendance, do a check-in instead. So something similar to what we did earlier in this webinar. I asked you to go to click a link, and then from there I was able to see, okay, a lot of you are in a good mood today, so I have to be able to match that mood for this webinar. So that's the idea of checking in. It's you as the educator, you know, getting sense of what is happening in your current environment. So online, you can actually do check-ins. I do it every session. And then, so if there are students who don't answer, I'm able to check as well. Because if they didn't check in, that's the time that I reach out to those who did not answer online. I'd like us to consider Facebook because, um, you know, our students may not have Wi-Fi, but they do have phones and they do have access to Facebook because it's part of free data. So, and I think even CHED pushes for, extending all possible help, using all possible channels to be able to reach our students. So consider FB and YouTube, because YouTube, you can access it for free. And then make sure, one of the things that you want to be able to do is to come up with a very organized virtual classroom. That, I think, is one of the things that could ensure the presence of your students. If your students have autism or ADHD and magulo yung virtual classroom nyo, it's disorganized, chances are they won't come back. So you have to make it accessible, not just the idea of them being able to go into your class online, but also the idea of them understanding what you're trying to do in the class. So I think, a well-organized virtual classroom will ensure the presence of students as well in your sessions. But again, as I said, online options are not enough. You also have to be able to provide offline options. So have available resources, have printed material, pocket Wi-Fi storage devices, assistive technology. Although I have my apprehensions when it comes to teachers learning apps for special assistive technology at this time. Although I do recommend that you explore all the possibilities. One of the part of the current context also is that we're trying to learn everything all at the same time. And so, if chances are you may have access to that assistive device, but maybe your students don't. A lot of apps are available online. A lot of apps are also available via Google Play, etc. But the thing is, sometimes they're paid apps. And again, we want to ensure that presence is, we have all of our students present in our class. So maybe let's work with what we have. Later, I'll show you tips that we can work with the apps that we currently have, that are available, easily available to us. Available resources. And then again, no need to check attendance, but to monitor if they picked up their learning packets. If 3 weeks after you send out the learning packets, if they're still there, then I think that's a red flag for us to be able to reach out. So text and call our students periodically. For those who may opt to do blended learning, maybe not at this time, but in the next few months, again, just a word of reminder, blended learning does not mean you design it out of convenience. Like, for example, okay, I meant this to be an online session, but since I was not able to prepare well, I'll just do offline instead. No, that's not blended learning. So the idea of blended learning is that everything is pre-designed. You are able to determine which are online courses, which are online sessions, which are offline. And then for online classes, you also have to take into consideration if these are asynchronous or synchronous. So again, synchronous are sessions that happen simultaneously. You're all online all at the same time, as opposed to asynchronous where you can just post material and then the students can come in and out of that virtual classroom anytime and retrieve materials. You can also do live streaming and recording of face-to-face sessions for blended learning, especially now that we're being asked to reduce the capacity of our classrooms to 50%. So live streaming of face-to-face sessions will definitely be a plus for us. Next slide. Okay, so this is a screenshot of a class of, this is a Google Classroom that I have for one of my classes in the graduate level. If you notice, there are, I've organized it in such a way that it's easy to determine where to go. Like I have May 23 session, June 6, June 13, and then for each session, I have numbers so that the students who come in would know how to sequence the material that they will be checking. And then, as I said, do a check-in. So I also ask my students to do online check-in. So if they click on this, then they can go to Padlet as well. And you can be very creative actually with your check-in sessions. Next slide. So this one, this is a check-in session that I did. I just changed some of the images so as not to give away my class. But the first thing that I ask two things every time I do check-ins, especially if it's the first session or if it's the first time I'm meeting them. First is what the current state of mind of my students are. And I encourage them to use images. For those with special needs or additional needs, this will especially be important, and it will be something that will ensure participation in your class as well. Because, like for example, those with learning disabilities, those who have difficulty with writing, with typing, with spelling, with constructing sentences, images would be an easier way to get their message across. So my question here was, what is your current state of mind? And so the idea is for the teacher to not just look at it so that, okay, so ganyan pala siya. It's not as simple as that. You have to absorb the responses of the students and then use them in designing your next sessions. So for this, we have a pensive look. You have someone who looks upset, someone who looks like he's waiting. But I have one student here who seems to be burdened. And then look at the timestamp. It was done at 10 o'clock in the evening. So that goes to show also that, there might be some students in your class who are stressing already. And so you want to be able to ease their stress. You don't want to add on to their stress while they're in your class. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one, the second question that I always ask. So the first, again, is what is your current state of mind? Second question is, how is your internet connection? For this one, so there are different images as well. Ito, Teletubby na nahihimatay sa kanyang connection. Merong mabilis, luckily. It seems to be okay. And then this one, this is actually a GIF or a GIF. And so what she says is that the internet is strong, but the device is weak. So we take those into consideration, and then again look at the timestamp. I placed this as a May 23 check-in. Some answered May 20. Sorry, I cannot see May. I think this is May 25. There's June 2. There's May 26, and then there are one answers in the morning, one late at night. So this goes to show you that you cannot, in asynchronous learning, you have to be able to consider that a lot of students work in different ways. They work um, with a schedule of their own. They have their own routines. So you want to be able to respect that in flexible learning. Okay, next slide. So there, the idea is you use your students' check-ins to determine how to design your next sessions. You don't want to be like this vet who, diagnoses this whale as having an allergy to bird droppings. Na, whale nga, underwater. So 'di ba, hindi nagma-match yung information. And we want to be able to come up with designs, with sessions, or with lessons that respond to what the students need. So yeah, pay attention to your students' check-ins. Next slide. Okay, next slide, please. Now, for student participation and achievement, they're actually closely linked together. And one of the best ways to understand, to be able to ensure participation and achievement of our students is to understand what their needs are. We have a lot of disabilities or disorders that are here. I mentioned several, and chances are you may have one or two students in your inclusive class who may have these. So what I did for the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, what I did was to come up with a summary of what their possible difficulties will be academic-wise. So under flexible learning, again, the first thing that we have to consider is access to materials. That will get them present in your class. For the blind and the deaf, definitely this will be a problem if you keep on generating PowerPoint presentations and there is no, for example, there's no assistive technology available for the blind student to find out what your PowerPoint presentation is all about. So for the deaf, if you just give out PowerPoint presentations, I think that is fine. But if you give, if you do, for example, you give them audio recordings or YouTube links without subtitles, those can pose a problem. So the maybe, I put maybe here because it, they may be affected by this if the teacher is not careful. If the teacher is not mindful, the blind may have reading and comprehension difficulties. On per se, or by itself, reading and comprehension should not be a problem for the blind. But again, if, for example, in your virtual classroom, you give out very you don't do very organized virtual classrooms, then again, it may pose a problem for them. Or for example, if we don't have braille materials, etc., you keep on giving out written materials with no option for them to hear what the reading materials are all about, then yeah, it will pose a problem. Same with writing difficulties. In Microsoft Word, I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a dictate option in Microsoft Word where you can just speak and Microsoft Word will type what you say. So that can be an option that you can suggest for your students who are blind. If, for example, other materials are not available. For the deaf, again, for the deaf, of course they can read, but then if you keep on giving out readings that are too long, for example, presentations that have so many words that it's hard to process, then that could pose a problem for them. For physical disabilities, of course, online won't be a problem, but if they have access issues and you ask them to pick up, for example, the materials, and they rely on public transportation for them to be able to access materials. So again, it could pose a problem. For ASD, again, maybe for reading comprehension difficulties, writing and math, it really depends on the way. In other words, you don't want to overwhelm them with your materials. You want to make sure that the items that you provide in your classes are they can be task analyzed, or maybe you have task analyzed them for them, and so when you give it out to them, they're sent in chunks. That would definitely work for communication disorders, for LD, and for ADHD. For behavioral disorders, mostly in my experience, it becomes the behavioral disorders become um, a deterrent, for example, or a factor in education if they're not motivated. So you want to be able to provide materials that, again, don't overwhelm them. You want to ensure that, as they look at your virtual classroom, or when they receive the materials that you've sent to them, they don't feel overwhelmed. In fact, what you want is for them to feel empowered, that they can finish the requirements that you sent them, and that they will learn from your class. Next slide. Okay. Before the pandemic, there were two possible scenarios that we always had to consider in a typical learning space. Number one, is there a student who actually disclosed that she or he has a disability? Or number two, walang disclosure, no disclosure at all, but you feel there may be some persons who may be at risk for certain disabilities or for certain disorders. Next slide. So for cases like this, if there's a disclosure of a disability, that is the only time that you can provide differentiated instruction, or that you can do accommodations. Accommodations, what are accommodations? These are things that you do, maybe strategies, teaching strategies that you provide your student with additional needs, the one who disclosed the disability or the condition. Okay, you provide the accommodations for that person because you want to ensure, you want to give them a sense of achievement. You want to be able to provide that for the student. And so if there is no disclosure, the usual practice is that you do not you do not provide accommodations. Okay, again, if there is a disclosure of a disability, you can provide accommodations to that particular student. So again, it's the person with the disability that you accommodate, not the entire class. So if you look at this second photo, this is the accommodation. That for this person, this is the support, the level of support that the person needs. So this is what you give him, one box. But for this particular student, you give him two boxes because that is what he needs. And, so they differ depending on the needs, depending on their needs. So that is an accommodation. Again, if there is no disclosure, you do not accommodate because you don't want to be accused of labeling a student to have a condition, or you don't want to be accused of playing favorites. So again, accommodate only when there is disclosure. But this again is this is what happened prior to COVID-19. So prior to the pandemic, you rely on the disclosures. Next slide. Okay, so a point of emphasis. Now, accommodations do not alter the content of your courses. What you're trying to do is change the delivery so that, for example, the content is more easily absorbed by the student. And so you want to make it possible for your swans, for your students with additional needs, to show what they know without being impeded by the disability. So you want to give them a fighting chance. So that is what accommodations are. And examples of this would be, in the next slide. Okay, so you can have presentation accommodations, response accommodations, setting accommodations, timing. So for example, instead of giving a lecture for this particular child, or instead of giving readings, you give him an audio recording instead. Or for response accommodations, instead of doing a written exam, so this particular student has dysgraphia or dyslexia. So give him an oral exam instead. Well, assuming the point of the exam is not reading or writing, no, or spelling, then I think you can do oral exams instead of written exams. Setting accommodations for those with ADHD allow the use of fidget spinners in class. So instead of them disrupting others, or yung tapping tables, tapping their pens, causing disruptions for other students, allow the use of fidget spinners. So it's a setting accommodation. You don't allow the fidget spinner for the other students na um, wala namang ADHD. You provide it only for the student who needs it. Timing accommodation. So for example, you allow frequent breaks, or schedule accommodations. You extend certain deadlines, or maybe break down the requirements. So it's not one overwhelming requirement, but several bite-sized requirements. And then you help always with self-regulation. So for example, you use an alarm to help with time management, etc. So these are examples of presentation accommodations. Next slide, of accommodations for students with additional needs. But yeah, our current context again, we don't know what exactly the circumstances of our students are. So we assume everyone would have needs. And so, next slide. If you plan for each student, with the idea that you give accommodations as needed, that might be overwhelming for the teacher. So actually, for me, as an inclusive ed practitioner, I welcome flexible learning because it actually helps us. It provides the impetus to remove the barriers and to actually design in an inclusive way. So for me, if there's a silver lining to having to migrate to flexible learning, it's this. For inclusive education practitioners, one of the things that I appreciate is that a lot of teachers I know are starting to become inclusive, because prior to the pandemic, there was, it's been a battle for SPED and inclusive ed practitioners to try to make people understand why it's important to go inclusive. Now I think more teachers are starting to see the sense of inclusive education. And if you think about it, it will be easier to just remove the barriers altogether than to go one at a time, providing what exactly this particular student needs. So actually, the idea of flexible learning and inclusive education is also meant not to overwhelm the educator. Next slide. So that is what we want. I think because of flexible learning, what used to be considered as accommodations before the COVID-19 pandemic should now be considered part of the new normal. So at this point in time, we cannot not be inclusive, because we don't just think about the student with additional needs or with the student with a disability in mind. We think of everyone, those with access to internet, those without access to gadgets, etc. So now we will have to be inclusive. Next slide. Okay, so how can you ensure the participation and achievement of all your learners in class? Next. Okay. I'd like to introduce to you the idea of universal design for learning. UDL, actually, if you're a basic ed teacher and you've seen the DepEd order on K-12 guidelines, this was released last year, August. It's DepEd Order 21, Series 2019. They specifically mentioned K-12 to become an inclusive framework. In fact, inclusive education has to be at the heart of K-12. And this universal design for learning is actually the framework that we're being encouraged to use. As an inclusive ed practitioner and a SPED practitioner, I actually agree that UDL would be the best way to address the needs of everyone all at the same time. So the idea is that you think about the barriers, you think about the possible challenges that each student in your class might face. So in other words, you anticipate the needs of your learners, and then from there, you plan around your courses. So there are three elements to UDL. First is multiple means of representation, and then multiple means of action and expression, and then you have multiple means of engagement. For this webinar, I'd like us to focus on representation and action and expression, because I think this is what most educators have difficulty with at this time. Anyway, if you're able to do both, provide multiple means of representation and action and expression, the engagement will follow. Next slide. So if you want to learn more about UDL, you can go to www.cast.org. Again, that's cast.org. And one of the things that, they give tips on how you can do representation and expression. So these are things, I just paraphrased them a bit, but these are tips that they give general ed, basic ed educators. So actually, this is meant for inclusive settings, because nga you project that your class will be very diverse, and so you want to be able to provide options for all types of students. In a sense, it's like designing for a mall, or designing for one floor of the mall. So you want multiple means of representation. The idea is to go multisensorial. So instead of just doing lectures, try also providing other types or other sources of information, like infographics, videos. You have audio recordings, if you have podcasts, readings, etc. But at the same time, you also have to clarify terms. So you have to be able to speak the same language as your students, and they should be able to understand you. You give examples, engage with your students metacognitively as well. So, but apart from that, you also have to be able to provide means of expression, various means of expression. So, how is this in practice? As a teacher, you teach several ways, but as you also allow the students to express what they've learned in several ways. So we are trying to veer away from the one size fits all type of design for designing lessons. So for example, if you got used to giving essays as or maybe reflection papers as a course requirement, diba, usually we're used to saying, okay, so you make a 5,000 word essay, etc. Those actually for UDL, that would be just one way of providing a means of expression for the student. You want to be able to allow them to express what they've learned in other ways. So for example, don't just allow essays. Maybe you can ask them to do infographics. You can ask them to do maybe creative output. In one of my classes this semester, I asked for creative output for a topic that I discussed in class. And, I came up with the most creative student outputs. One student made a painting. One student came up with a poem. One student did an oral presentation. One student did the video presentation. So, and if you look at it, you will be able to see that they did understand the concept. They did understand the lesson. So along with that, you will also have to make sure that you transform your rubrics. So you have to think not just about the output, but the process involved. So the rubrics will definitely change. So for example, you cannot just say accuracy of or grammar, because what if the student gives you a painting? There's no grammar to check there. So you look at how you can transform your rubrics so that you still you preserve the integrity of your course. You look at the program outcomes, your course outcomes, and you make sure that these are taken into consideration when you check your work. Also, make sure that the students understand what they're being assessed for. What are the rubrics? The rubrics, they have to be given at the start of the course or before the students do the requirements and not after, because if it's given after, then you might be missing learning opportunities there for you and your student. So value the process as much as the output, and then engage your students metacognitively. One of the things that I like to do is to always do goal setting. I have my students check the program, for example, the course outcomes for this particular lesson or this particular course, and then make sure that we're kept on track, so that even when I ask them to do certain activities, they know what the point of that particular activity is. If the students understand what they're supposed to do, whether this student has ADHD or ASD or a learning disability, if they understand why they're doing that particular task, then you will be able to engage with them better, and it will provide better options for them to achieve and participate in class. Next slide, please. Now, these are my tips for you. Taking into consideration flexible learning, I have several ideas that I'd like to share with you for multiple means of representation. So, for example, you can create downloadable PowerPoint presentations or PDF files with images and text. You can do downloadable audio recordings. You can record yourself, but you can also you can look online. There are a lot of sources. You just need to make sure these are credible sources. But then you can share these links or download them yourselves and then email them to your students. So that's also one way. Always, you have to provide the context of to your assigned tasks, because chances are you have a particular sense of why you're doing this, why you're giving this particular activity. But the students, when they read your instructions, they may take it another way. And so there's a possibility that you lose genuine learning there, because the point of the activity, it was missed by the student. So you want to be able to speak the same language again. So you provide context to your assigned tasks. Also, if you're doing online sessions, again, plan for synchronous and asynchronous. For those with additional needs, I suggest that you do both. You provide all the materials asynchronously, because that will respect the individual routines of all of your students. But at the same time, make sure that you can be reached in case the students come across materials that they have difficulty with. So, the idea that they're not left alone during this time, that I know a lot of people, a lot of students, even parents think, hindi na nagtuturo yung mga teachers. Actually, a lot of work comes in designing these courses and making sure that these, the session, the material that you provide, these are the things that are, the parents normally don't see. They just think materials are there, but actually it's the teachers that design those courses. So, but yeah, to help dissipate those types of misconceptions about online teaching, I suggest that you make yourselves available also for individual consultation if needed. So this synchronous consultations, these can be pre-scheduled, or you can just, tell your students, okay, message me, and then we'll set something up. We can schedule later on. You also want to be able to use graphic organizers. Graphic organizers for students with additional needs, these are one of the best things that you can give students with learning disabilities, students with ADHD, because there's a physical aspect to it. You are actually helping your students organize their thoughts into, and not just organize, but see how each component is related to the other. So graphic organizers are things that you can definitely use. You can create your own graphic organizer, or you go to PowerPoint. There's what's that, Smart Art Graphic, and there are options there, and it tells you what kinds of like, for example, if you want to show the relationship of something of certain concepts, then it's in PowerPoint. It will tell you, okay, these are the suggested organizers that you can use for this particular need. So make use of the materials, the apps that you currently have. Um, yeah, so PowerPoint can do that. You can also do word clouds. There are a lot of you just Google um, word cloud generator, and you can link these links. You can link these to your virtual classroom so that you can see how your students are able to to use these as well. You can also encourage them to do concept maps, or as a teacher, you do the concept map and then explain this to the student. Cascade the information using concept maps. You can also use YouTube videos or TED Talks. Make sure if you have students who are deaf in your classroom, make sure naman that there's subtitles, because the YouTube videos, the links would be useless if they can't hear and they can't make sense of the dialogue. Um, so that's for online options. For offline options, you have a lot of options as well. If you're teaching in the higher ed, actually, you go to the big publishing companies. Chances are they have available resources for you. For example, I am part of Rex. I am a Rex bookstore author as well. We produce modules that are readily available for students with actually our students in the tertiary level. And Rex bookstore, actually, when they produce modules, they also have instructors kit. So for example, you buy the module, the physical module, or you buy a textbook, and then there would be a PowerPoint presentation that teachers can just use anytime. So if you have a student with additional needs, you just use a PowerPoint and then tweak it the best way you think you can for your particular student, and that's it. So it's just a matter of knowing which resources are available to us. But yeah, there are options like that. So those are learning modules. You can also make your own. Of course, this assumes that you have enough time to create your own material. But yeah, you can create learning packets. For basic ed, actually, I don't know if you know that there's Canvas for Filipino teachers. Go on Facebook and look for that group. They are provide Canvas. Sorry, not Canvas. Canva.com is providing free Canva Pro accounts for teachers all over the world because of the pandemic, and they're providing that subscription, that free Pro subscription for teachers for an entire year, so that they can produce their own material, and it would be something presentable, something that would motivate the students also to work. So yeah, there are options like that. There are also textbook with worksheets. If you belong to an institution that already uses textbooks, then maybe what you can do would be to just highlight which materials should be read on a particular time frame, etc. And then for those who have difficulty with reading, you can look into different text-to-speech apps. If you're creating your own material, you have options as well. Again, Microsoft Word has Speak or Read Aloud, where it's the computer who reads the material for you. That would be good for those who have reading difficulties, but sometimes I think because devices, tech gadgets, reading out loud, sometimes there's a certain cadence that it sounds robotic, so it might not be the most wise strategy if you want your students with learning disabilities to understand what they're reading. I suggest you record yourself reading the material, because you will read it better as compared to the technical device reading it for you. Okay, because of course, if it's a real person reading it, there would be inflections, there would be chunking, there would be you would use the right tone, and these are elements in reading and comprehension that our students with learning disabilities will need. Okay, so yeah, and then recorded lectures and other instructional materials. If you're unable to have these printed because again there are budget constraints, maybe it's better to provide the storage device, so you can have your student provide his or her own storage device, or if your school provides this, then good for you. So these are ideas for multiple means of representation. And the next slide, please. For okay, this one is what I would like to highlight. All the things that I just suggested, they actually are very helpful for all types of students, but specifically for particular disabilities as well. So, for example, creating downloadable PowerPoint presentations. If you create it in such a way that the text won't be too long, if you provide enough there's a good balance between text and image, then it will be helpful for the deaf. It will be helpful for those with learning disabilities, for those with ASD, with ADHD, with communication disorders. So, you may be doing a lot of things already that you did not realize are already helpful for the student with additional needs. It's just a matter of, creating those particular materials with them in mind. So it's actually not impossible. It's very doable. You just have to, at the end of the day, it's a presentation. How you deliver these materials, how you present it in your virtual classroom, or how you send it to your students offline. So of course, if you keep on just saying, okay, so there's a list of instructions that you have to do, these are the pages, etc., that's not gonna be motivating for any of your students. It's not just for the person with ADHD, it's for the typical student as well. So think of how you will be cascading your learning materials, how you will be giving these away, especially again, if you choose to use storage devices, sana naka-organize when you save the instructional materials that you'll be passing on to your students. Make sure these are organized into folders. Make sure you label them properly, because these are things that these small details can overwhelm the student with additional needs. Next slide, please. Okay, for multiple means of expression, very simply, provide a lot of opportunities for them to show you what they've learned and how much they've learned. So for online, for example, don't just allow online submissions. Maybe do online written submissions, do online oral submissions if your students are okay with synchronous learning. If not, then go for asynchronous submissions, or do offline written, offline oral for offline options. What could be offline written? You have a printed out output, or something that's done creatively, tangibly, or you can do offline oral. So the student sends a flash drive, a storage device with his or her audio recording or video recording. So that's an option. So you don't limit your students to just one type of submission. Again, that's the essence of flexible learning. You allow these students who may be placed in different circumstances you respect their circumstances, you respect their context, and these should not be hindrances for them to be present, for them to participate, and for them to achieve in your class. Online, there's Google Forms or graphic organizers, again, built into PowerPoint or Microsoft Word. For offline courses, you can actually print out these online material, and these could be your worksheets. And then you send these same worksheets with the scaffolds already. By scaffolds, it can be, for example, blank graphic organizers. It can be prompts like you want them to fill in the blanks to complete the sentence. Today I learned blank. Okay, so that is a prompt, and that would be very helpful for those with learning disabilities, for those with ADHD who can't seem to, they have a lot of ideas but they don't know how to start. So scaffolds and prompts would be very useful for them. And then one thing, this is what we do in Miriam College, in the College of Education. Instead of asking students to do one big requirement at the end of the course, what we have them do is take that one big requirement and break them down. So it becomes formative assessment. So we do the entire requirement all throughout the semester, and so by the end of the module, because we do modules in Miriam College, by the end of the module, they're not overwhelmed and they're ready for the next one. So we were able to preserve the integrity of the course. We were able to meet program and course outcomes, and it was done in such a way that it respected the needs of the students. It respected the circumstances of the students and their context. In flexible learning, one of the things that is very important is the role also of the administrator. So in your schools, you have to be able to understand what would be, for example, what your policies would be on, for example, submissions or attendance. In Miriam College, what we have a current policy on prerequisites, so we removed all the prerequisites, and then so if you're not able to for example fulfill all of the requirements within a semester, then you can extend. You'll be given an incomplete for now. It's the same thing also for UP. You're given an incomplete, and then you're given an entire year to finish the requirements without it affecting your next enrollment. So yeah, that's a classic way of how policies are important in flexible learning, so that it does not overwhelm the students. So yeah, next slide, please. So we're nearing the end. Yeah, as like the previous slide, these things actually are very useful for particular students with particular needs, and so yeah, I suggest that you consider these practices. Next slide. Okay, now as I said, universal design for learning and flexible learning, they call for practices that wherein you don't you teach many ways. Okay, so again, it's like designing for them all. But earlier I did say that it can be overwhelming to design everything all at the same time. So what you can do is to go for the bare minimum. So my suggestion, so as to not overwhelm yourselves, because of course as a teacher I also understand how time is limited for us. It's exhausting to plan, actually, to plan. And so if you do that, if you exhaust yourself, sometimes your courses don't come out the way it should. And that would have implications also on the learning of our students. So let's keep our own capabilities, our own skills, and our own realities as educators in mind as well. So my suggestion is just if you can't plan for the entire module, the entire mall, plan for the bare minimum, I would suggest present at least 2 options for knowledge representation, 2 options for expression, 2 options for submission of requirements, and then give your students enough time to work. What would be, next slide please, what would be considered enough time to work? There was a study in Carnegie Mellon in 2013 saying that one of the best ways to project how much time you should give your students to work would be to multiply how long it took a teacher to do the task by a certain factor. Usually they multiply 3 or 4 So for example, next slide. If a teacher accomplishes a task in 1 hour, multiply that by 3 or 4, and most likely your students will need to be given 3 to 4 hours to do that particular task. Why 3 to 4 hours? Because you consider their context. You consider that they may be sharing gadgets. They may not have internet connection, etc. So that is for a typical student. But for the next slide, if your student has special or additional needs, I suggest something longer. So for our swans, maybe if it's 1 hour for the teacher, it might take 5 to 6 hours for students with additional needs. Why? Because they will have to make sense of your material. You have to anticipate that they might not get your material in just one reading. They might have to go back and forth, back and forth. They might have to consult with you. They might need also to fall into a routine. Like for example, if your student has ASD or autism, they may need to build a routine first before they do a particular task. So all of these things need to be considered. So I think this would be enough time to work for. This would be enough time for students with additional needs. Next slide. Okay, so how would it look like? So this is a sample of a bare minimum inclusive class. Do everything. Again, this is the reason why I placed a box, because you want to do both. You want to offer both online and offline options. Do a downloadable PowerPoint presentation with images and text. What I do is I actually create one entire PowerPoint presentation and then I divide them. And so when I put them up on Google Classroom, it's actually one entire PowerPoint, but there are, for example, videos in between. I'll show you screenshots of how I do this later on. But yeah, the idea is that you work with your own time, also work with what you have, and then provide as much option for learning for your students. So they read, they see the PowerPoint presentation, but the learning also gets reinforced because of videos, because of audio, because of readings that you might present to them. You may use graphic organizers. Again, this is not meant to be a checklist. This is something that you need to do for your class. If it's meant to be an asynchronous session, you can actually stretch this over a week. So, kunwari, one PowerPoint or two PowerPoint presentations for day one, and then for day two, another PowerPoint presentation, or maybe a reading on day three, an audio presentation. So the idea is, if taken all together, then it's one entire learning experience. That is what you want to create. You want to create learning experiences that are relevant and useful for your students. Now, offline, you know what you did online, you just need to print them out. That's it. That would be the offline option for the students. So you can either send them or by courier, or maybe the school does pickups, allows pickups, or particularly in Miriam College, what I do is I message my students who I don't see online, because you get to see naman sino yung mga who are participating, who are um, um, on the right track in terms of the time frame that you want to be followed. But apart from that, so I can see whether a particular student is offline. So that's the time that I contact my student either through text or I call them. If they answer, I ask, would you like to be given an incomplete na lang, so that you have the entire year anyway to do this, or do you want material sent to you? And yeah, in other words, you allow the student to make that decision. But the important thing is communication. So you communicate with your students. Next slide. Okay, and then again, provide both synchronous and asynchronous consultations or sessions. break down one huge requirement so that um, what you do is that you don't overwhelm the student. Sorry. Okay, so you don't overwhelm the student, but at the same time, you also um, do formative assessment as well. And then you allow two types of submissions, online written and online oral, or if offline, you provide offline written or offline oral. And then if you do offline presentations or offline learning, I encourage you to provide a journal or do a journal exchange where the student can, for example, write his or her thoughts. And then that's where you can do your correcting, your monitoring, or your giving of feedback. So again, the important thing for offline courses would be to preserve the communication with between the teacher and the student. So lastly, these are screenshots of how I do it, how I do inclusive education in my own classes. So what I do is I create my PowerPoint presentations, I put notes, and then for the next slide, so there's an option there where you can record yourself talking. So what I do is I just read what's in my notes. What's it? So for every slide, actually there are notes there. So I record myself, but sometimes when I record myself, I am unable to upload because there's difficulty also sometimes with my connection. So if I'm unable to do that, and if I have difficulty uploading, chances are your student would have difficulties downloading them. So you can opt not to record, but next slide, what you can do is to just give them that. So what I do is when I hand out my PowerPoint presentations, I tell my students, please don't view them in presentation or in slide view. I encourage you to read the presentation with the notes, and then you read them out yourselves as if it were me lecturing to you. So that's it. And then an offline option for that would be to print down everything, and then that's what you send your students. So you were able to hit two birds with one stone. It's an online option, it's also an offline option. Next slide. And then, so this is how my Google Classroom looks like. I put dates, I put numbers so that they know they're directed regarding sequence. I always ask, how are you today? I have different questions every session. But I also label the point of the activity or the point of the post. So for this one, I want them to think. For this one, I want them to reflect. For this one, I want them to do something. So the expectation right away is, okay, I will need to do, I probably would need to produce a certain output. Or this one, they have to assess themselves. So next slide. Okay, experience, assess, challenge, think. Okay, so these are things that I label. Next slide. And then I also do the intention. I make sure to communicate with them exactly what the point of this task is, and then I curate the resources. So I am able to screen which sources are credible, which are not. Sometimes I make my own resources and then I upload. But they're all in one space so that they know that, okay, for this particular activity, for this particular experience, these are the only things that I need, and it's not going to overwhelm me. So if your student has ADHD or a learning disability, you know, you're handing out the resources to them in a very organized way. Next slide. And finally, this one. So this is a submission. If I feel there's a need for correction, then I communicate with the students. So this is actually a part, like a practice activity. So the next time, so I gave my my comments. I think there are certain things that need to be corrected. The next time you do it, that will be the requirement that I'll be grading. And you know, taking that along with other similar activities, then that is actually that's one big requirement that I broke down into several workable sessions. And that's it. Next slide. Yeah, every single student needs differentiation in some way at some time for something. So I hope that you keep this in mind. Be inclusive. It's the only way to teach during this pandemic. And I wish you good luck in designing your courses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Teen, for that very informative lecture regarding individualized and differentiated instruction for the PWDs. And also, our participants are very happy based from our live comments. Our participants are very happy for the sharing that you have made, for giving them various tips on how they can make their online learning materials that is adaptable, that is applicable to individuals or students who do have disabilities. Okay, so before we move on to the next part, the open forum, before we're going to read the various questions of our participants in Facebook and in our YouTube channel, Ma'am Tin, I would just like to uh, acknowledge our participants who are watching us live in Facebook and in YouTube. So thank you very much to our participants from unahin ko na po ang Region 1, our participants from La Union, Pangasinan, Ilocos Norte, and also in Ilocos Sur. We have also, Ma'am Tin, participants coming from Baguio City, Malabon, Cabanatuan, Lipa, Batangas. We have also from Cagayan Valley, Quezon City, Pasay, Cebu, Laguna, Bulacan, Catanduanes, and also as far as Davao, Bohol,
Mm.
Agusan del Sur, Caloocan, Masbate, Antipolo, Bukidnon, Cavite, Tagaytay, also on Usamis City, Bicol, Sursogon, Pampanga, Surigao, Camarines Sur, Mindoro, Bataan, and Negros Occidental. So those are
Wide audience.
right. Thank you so much for
Thank
tuning in
you.
our webinar series on differentiated instructions for PWD with, of course, our expert, Ms. Teen Aligada Halal. Okay, so I guess our speaker is already ready and set to answer our first question. Ma'am Tin, this is a question from Ma'am Glenda Rebucas. Thank you, Ma'am Halal, for sharing your expertise. May I ask when and how often you do this summative assessment, ma'am?
Actually, since we shifted to flexible learning for last semester, we in Miriam College we've tried to stay away from summative assessment, at least in the College of Education, because we recognize that summative assessments may overwhelm not just the student but also the teacher, because the idea of my sense in doing assessment is that it has to be uh, a communicative thing. It has to be a two-way street. Now, the reason why you assess is not just for you to understand what the student has learned, but it's also an opportunity for you to correct notions that may need correction. It's an opportunity for you to give feedback. And if you wait too long, too late at the end of the semester, for example, or at the end of a course, you might miss out on opportunities like that. So I think for flexible learning, form summative assessments will probably formative assessments will maybe make more sense than summative assessments.
Thank you, Ma'am Tin. Another question we have here from Mr. Carlo Bagayawa. How can I assure, ma'am, the presence of my SWAN students, either if it is online or offline, which is better way to apply, especially to a student having an autism? God
Okay.
bless you. Thank you po.
Thank you for the question. If it's a student with autism, well, there are different levels of autism. So you have to understand if that, well, you have to check. if the child is someone that you can easily communicate with. I know a lot of students, like in our school, Laro Lapis at Tidro, sometimes we have students with autism who are very used to certain routines. Like they're okay with face-to-face sessions, definitely. But if they see the teacher online, they don't want to approach the laptop, the screen. And so sometimes online classes won't be applicable to them, or it's not going to be as meaningful as if they were to do face-to-face sessions. So what we do is to communicate with the parents. It depends on how old the student is. If the student is in basic ed, and you're well, the best way really would be to communicate with the parents, because at this point in time, um, a lot of the responsibilities, in terms of staying on top of the learning experiences of the children are now with the parents, more than the teachers. The SPED teachers will only be able to do so much given the current situation. So you have to communicate with the parents of the student. But if the student, for example, with autism is already in the tertiary level, and I would think hindi siya abot ng higher ed kung hindi siya nakakausap. So you might want to be able to reach out to him, maybe call him, or maybe send something over courier. And one of the best things I can give you also for those with autism would be to maybe provide the student with a routine, because a lot of those with autism really thrive on routines. And so maybe if you can suggest a schedule for the student, so that you know that, for example, okay, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I have to be able to do my schoolwork, whether online or offline. So maybe that's one thing that you can send to your student's house, a schedule, and then ask if this is something workable. But yeah, the idea is you communicate and then find out why, what would, like if the student refuses to go online, find out why. If the student has offline concerns, then a routine would best work for him.
Thank you, Ma'am Teen. Another question. This is from Mr. Paul Lopez de Jesus. Professor Tina, will it give PWD some sort of an unfair advantage, quote unquote, if we alter conceptual difficulty for them so that we would be able to cover almost everything that is in the intended curriculum?
Actually, it might give them a disadvantage if we do not provide the accommodations. There are certain nuances actually. When you say accommodations, you don't alter the content of the curriculum. What you change would be how you deliver the lesson. So that's why you can, for example, change your schedule, change the way that you present your lessons. You can change the way that the student will give the requirements, etc. If you modify the curriculum, that's the time that you change the content. Under flexible learning, we actually, as I said earlier, it's a curriculum design. To a certain extent, we are expected to modify certain things. But when we modify curriculum, we have to make sure that the essence of the curriculum, the integrity of the course, is preserved. So we don't want to take away things that are actually crucial in the curriculum. So the best way to do this would be to ensure that everyone um, does not is not put at a disadvantage. What we want to make sure of is that we understand the program outcomes, so the learning outcomes, and see if by altering certain things in the curriculum, will this change the outcomes. If you change the outcomes, then chances are you've changed too much, and so that might not be the best way to modify the curriculum. Again, you want to preserve it. So yeah, the idea really of accommodation is it's like the way to see it, accommodations versus modifications of curriculum. Accommodations, you just give them a few, for example, you give them lead time, to start a race, for example, if it's a sport that you're looking at. But if it's modification of curriculum, you're changing the entire arena. So imbis na kunwari sa Marikina Sports Center ka magpapa-race sa smaller oval, but that would be modification. Curriculum, accommodation would be you give Marikina Sports Center pa rin, pero give the child enough lead time para medyo humabol naman siya dun sa needs also of the other students. So again, it would be a disadvantage if you do not provide accommodations.
Thank you, Ma'am Teen. Another question from Mr. Edgar Pagdigan. I am currently working in research along inclusive education. The context on inclusivity is far different in higher education institutions. After they graduate from high school, tertiary institutions allow the special students to enroll in specific courses. They are fused into normal classes, but some teachers do not have the basic knowledge about this. What are possible interventions that HEIs can provide to teachers in order to promote diversity and inclusivity to all students? Ma'am Teen?
Yeah, this is actually a perennial problem. It's a concern that we in inclusive education have been battling for the longest time. It's the idea that, because when you say inclusive education, it's not just the setting, but it's also the environment. And part of the environment is a mindset. Inclusive education is not going to work if the student is just in your class, but the professor or the teacher is not doing accommodations. Because if so, then, as I said, it's not inclusive education. Remember, we're going for presence, participation, and achievement. A lot of the classes that I have seen, a lot of teachers also and students that I've talked to within the context of inclusive education, they say that they're just in class. Sometimes they get to participate, but it's a struggle for them to achieve. So then that's not an inclusive setup. It's just that you're there. A student with additional needs is in the class, but it's something. It's like you're inclusive by circumstance. It's not really real inclusion. So what we do as inclusive ed advocates, is we really try to go for awareness. So one of the things that would get inclusive education done is to, it has to, inclusive practices have to be observed from the ground up, actually top down, because it works both ways. There are some administrators, for example, or school policy makers who want to be inclusive, but when you observe down the line, it's those in the grassroots level who are not inclusive. But then there are also some institutions where you have the faculty who would want to be inclusive and they try to employ inclusive ed practices, but it's the higher ups who tend to be resistant. So we want to be, depending on where you are and where you are in the institution, you want to be able to find a balance between policy and practice, so people understand what it means to be inclusive. So there's someone who will train the faculty, or maybe have an inclusive ed officer who can do consultations, who can probably do observations, and who can train the faculty at the grassroots level, but who can also help administrators craft policies. Because again, sometimes you want to be inclusive as a faculty member, as a teacher, but if policies don't allow you to do that, then it's definitely going to be difficult. So you want to be able to get both parties aligned, and then come up with inclusive practices. Starting, for example, from admissions. Will you, for example, if it's an entrance test, I know for a fact that for example, in Benilde, they go through the assessment, the entrance exams the same way as all the other students. They have to pass the admissions exam first, but once they're in, the professors who are assigned to them they make sure that they have inclusive practices. Um, if you declare that you have a disability during assessment, I think I'm not sure. I hope I'm not wrong about this, but I think in UP, if you declare that you have a disability, then they will provide you with certain accommodations when you take the exam, and then that will also be taken into consideration when you're given classes. So again, the best way to be successful in inclusive education is to have both administrators, policymakers, and those implementers involved in the process.
Thank you, Ma'am Teen. Another question we have from Mr. Rian J. Hernandez. Any mental health tips advice for special education teachers during this difficult time, ma'am? Thank you.
Um, yeah, actually, not just for special education. The thing is, with this pandemic, it's like we're all special education teachers because we have all tried to, to address the needs of all our learners. I guess what is happening now is that um, basic ed teachers, general ed teachers, those who have not had prior experience to teaching students with learning disabilities or with additional needs, now you're getting a taste of how it is to be a SPED teacher. And my tip for that would be to just really focus on what you can do. Don't try to promise the moon and the stars and the sun. Do what you can and just be mindful of your practices. Sometimes, it's a learning process, it's a learning curve, trying to be inclusive. And sometimes the idea that I have to be inclusive all the time, this sometimes adds to the stress and the anxiety of teachers. So do what you can, have maybe a clear vision of what you want. At the end of the day, if it's something that is not met, then that's it. We let it go as teachers. But also good health. A healthy diet is very important. Try to incorporate exercise and try to work within your school hours as well, your office hours. Um, Working from home has disrupted our work behaviors, our work routines. So it's very important to do self care at this point.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ma'am. Okay, so next, this is all our last question from our participants in Facebook and YouTube. This is from Mr. Douglas Wilfred Rimando. I see a different story of inclusive education in higher education institutions. Yes, we can give accommodations to PWDs in their studies, but the end all must take up the board examinations in order to become registered professionals. What is your stand regarding this, ma'am?
Actually, if according to the Magna Carta, if you have a disability, if you're considered a PWD, you can actually ask for accommodations when you take the board exams. But sometimes even this won't be enough to help our students or our PWDs. For example, the deaf. I know of some people who have taken education courses and are trying to pass the LET, but have been having difficulty because of the language barrier. Remember that for the deaf, when of course they communicate by sign, but when that's translated, that's usually in English, and so they have difficulty with Filipino subjects. And in the LET, we know, if you're a teacher, then you know the type of exams, the type of questions that are there. If the questions are delivered in Filipino, that's already a disadvantage to them. So actually, I know a lot of the deaf who could have passed the LET, but because of language barriers, and these are things that unfortunately PRC has not, really modified yet, or so well, they haven't changed the format of the exam yet, at least for this particular cases, then they don't pass. That's it. But yeah, a lot of advocacy groups have been lobbying for certain changes to happen in the PRC level. But again, inclusive education is supposed to enhance learning. It's not supposed to cut corners, or it's not to make things easier. Sorry, it's meant to make things easier for the student with additional needs, but easier does not mean um, you have less courses to learn, or you have less kumbaga mas mababa yung standard. It's not like that. It really is just finding a way to make sure that whatever it is that the others are learning, the swans learn as well. So um, it has to, we have to preserve the integrity of the courses in order to ensure that when they do take the licensure exams, they pass. But yeah, that's they can demand for accommodations in taking their exams as well.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Teen. I guess that's the last question that we can throw to you. Uh, uh, I would just like to what we call this, read a commendation from our participants online. This is from Ma'am Tessa Ramento Fajardo. Appreciate the sharing, Miss Cristina. Your thoughts present a unique opportunity for us to rethink the need for accessible and inclusive education, especially for those needing special attention. Indeed, doing such will make a difference. Thank you, Region 1, and also thank you, Ma'am Teen. Again,
Thank
from
you.
us, Commission on Higher Education, Ma'am Teen, maraming salamat po.
Thank you also.
Our invitation to discuss differentiated instruction for PWDs. Ma'am Teen, any concluding statement po to all our participants?
Yeah, just thank you for taking the time out of your morning to tune into this webinar. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're present, goes to show also that you have the initiative to try to help our students with additional needs. So I hope this will not end here. I hope that you do try to be inclusive in your own practices, and I wish you well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. So,
Thank you, Dr. Mel.
maraming salamat, Ms. Cristina Halal, the Chairperson of Special Needs and Inclusive Education in Miriam College's Loyola campus. So, on
Thank
behalf of
you.
Education and Higher Education Region 1, our OIC Regional Director, Dr. Rogelio T. Galera, our Chief Dr. Danilo B. Bose, and Ms. Nympha Bueno. Maraming salamat po for accepting our invitation and for sharing your views on how we can address the needs of our students who do have disabilities. Okay?
Thank you also.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so this afternoon, we will also be having another topic regarding portfolio making. That is to be discussed to us by Mr. Louis Mark Plaza, a on specialist in Simeo Inotech in Quezon City. Okay, so that's the end of our morning session. Maraming salamat po for staying with us. I hope you will going to view again our online seminar this afternoon at 1 p.m. Okay? So ayun po, again, magsa-sign off lang muna kami. See you this afternoon. Maraming salamat po.